The icy heights of the Himalayas hid a storm that would erupt into one of South Asia's most defining military conflicts. This was the Kargil War, a high-altitude battle fought in brutal conditions, where the thin air made breathing difficult and the snow concealed both danger and determination. But this is not just the story of gunfire and explosions. This is the story of a strategy so daring, it aimed to change the political and military balance of an entire region. To understand the Kargil War, we must first look at the backdrop. By the late 1990s, India and Pakistan had already fought 3 wars. Tensions over Kashmir had never cooled. In 1998, both nations tested nuclear weapons, sending shockwaves through the world and altering the stakes of any future conflict. Trust between the two was fragile, perhaps non-existent. Against this tense background, Pakistan's military leadership began crafting a plan, one that would be limited in scope, but massive in psychological and strategic impact. The operation would later be known as Operation Badr. The objective was clear: seize unoccupied high-altitude positions on the Indian side of the line of control, particularly along the Kargil sector. From these heights, Pakistan could dominate the vital Srinagar-Leh highway, the lifeline connecting Ladakh to the rest of India. Cutting this route would disrupt Indian military supplies to the Siachen Glacier and force India into a defensive and diplomatic crisis. These posts were no ordinary positions. They sat at altitudes between 16,000 and 18,000 feet, in terrain so unforgiving that even in summer, temperatures could plunge below freezing. The thin air made every step exhausting. Soldiers would have to fight not only the enemy, but also the mountain itself. Pakistan's Northern Light Infantry, experts in mountain warfare, were chosen for the mission. They would move in small, highly trained teams, carrying heavy weapons in parts, hauling them up steep slopes under the cover of darkness. Every movement was done in secrecy. No large troop formations, no visible buildups. The hope was to hold these positions through the summer months and survive until winter. Snowfall would naturally seal the area from Indian counter-attacks. In early May 1999, Indian patrols began noticing unusual activity. At first, they believed they were dealing with militant small insurgent groups common in the region. But soon, reconnaissance revealed something far more serious. The intruders were professional soldiers, entrenched in fortified positions. Equipped with heavy artillery support, the Indian Army launched Operation Vijay to reclaim the lost ground. The challenge was immense. Every attack would be uphill against enemies with a commanding view. Every advance meant exposure to sniper fire, mortar shells, and freezing winds. The Indian side mobilized thousands of troops, artillery units, and the Indian Air Force to pound the high-altitude bunkers. The war soon became a brutal contest of endurance. The Bofors FH-77B howitzers, capable of precise fire at high altitudes, became India's weapon of choice. Meanwhile, Pakistani positions, often dug into solid rock, absorbed massive bombardments. Supply lines on both sides were stretched to breaking point. The geography shaped the battle's narrative. Key points like Tololing, Tiger Hill, and Point 4,875 became names etched in history. Each peak represented not just strategic advantage, but also immense sacrifice. At Tiger Hill, Indian forces climbed for hours under heavy fire, using ropes to scale near vertical ice-covered cliffs, finally overrunning the position after a fierce close-quarter fight. On the Pakistani side, soldiers used their knowledge of the terrain to maximum effect. Many fought to the last bullet, refusing to retreat. The advantage of height allowed smaller units to inflict heavy casualties before Indian forces could close in. But holding these posts came at a price. Resupplying ammunition and food meant traversing dangerous, exposed routes often under enemy. Artillery fire, international attention soon turned to the conflict. With both nations being nuclear powers, the world feared an escalation. The United States, particularly President Bill Clinton's administration, increased diplomatic pressure on Pakistan to withdraw. Pakistan's official stance was that the fighters were Kashmiri militants, but evidence pointed to the involvement of regular troops. As June turned into July, the tide began to shift. India's overwhelming numerical advantage, combined with Sustained artillery and airstrikes slowly forced Pakistani units to abandon some positions. The battles, however, were far from one-sided. In many cases, Indian forces paid in blood for every ridge and bunker they captured. The untold part of the Kargil strategy lies in its calculated gamble. The idea was not to start a full-scale war, but to create a limited crisis, one that would disrupt Indian supply lines, embolden insurgency in Kashmir, and force India into negotiations, potentially under international mediation. The high-altitude peaks were meant to be bargaining chips in a larger geopolitical game, but the plan underestimated India's military response and the weight of global diplomatic pressure. By late July, under mounting losses and international isolation, Pakistan announced a withdrawal from the occupied positions. The Kargil War officially ended, but its legacy was just beginning. The human cost was heavy. India reported over 500 soldiers killed. Pakistan's losses were also significant, though exact numbers remain debated. Families on both sides were left with grief and memories of loved ones who never returned from the mountains. Today, the icy ridges of Kargil remain guarded year-round. The war stands as a reminder of how geography, strategy, and political calculation can intersect, and how quickly those calculations can unravel. It showed the world the extremes of mountain warfare, where soldiers fight in thin air, where every step uphill can mean life or death, and where a single peak can decide the fate of thousands. The untold strategy of Kargil was bold, perhaps brilliant on paper, but in the end, the mountains decided the outcome, and they remember every man who dared to climb them.